Thank you for this invitation. I'll speak about statistical principles in the design of serosurveys. I'm Rajesh. This is joint work with several people from several institutes: Indian Institute of Public Health, Indian Statistical Institute, Indian Institute of Science, and Strand Life Sciences. So this is the trajectory of the cases history for COVID-19. During the first wave, July to October, actually the picture has from April 2020 to roughly February 2021. So the first wave was somewhere between July and October. The peak happened around October 13th. I'll indicate what we did during this first wave. If you look at the confirmed cases trajectory during an epidemic, it gives a biased estimate of infection prevalence. But when you're looking at public health management strategies, one would like unbiased estimates of this infection prevalence. This unbiased estimate is usually obtained via serological surveys. So in such surveys, what we do is we detect antibodies that survive for some length of time. These antibodies are immunoglobulin G, for example. I will denote them as IgG. They stay on for some length of time, and we would like to detect them and then get an estimate of how many people were infected. Now, when the Karnataka serosurvey team did its serosurvey, they actually did the serosurvey at this period, which is near the peak. So they did it between the 2nd of September and the 16th of September, when the infections were reasonably high at that time. And when one does serosurveys at this time, serosurveillance alone is not enough, because when you're doing this measurement for antibodies, these IgG antibodies, they take some time to develop. They become detectable only about 2 to 3 weeks after exposure. And one would have missed a significant fraction of those with active infection who had been infected, but they would not be detected by the serosurvey. This is an issue. And so one must, in order to get a better estimate of how many people have been infected up to that time, one must estimate not just seroprevalence, but also the active infection when active infection is high. And one takes the total burden, total disease burden, to be whatever is the past infection coming from antibody measurements and active infection by a measurement on this, by a measurement to assess active infection. These usually require different kinds of tests. And those kinds of tests are things that we are familiar with now. For example, the PCR-based test, polymerase chain reaction-based test, which detect small amounts of viral RNA. These you can detect at the time of active infection, but you can also detect them for some time after the infection as well, because these viral RNA remnants remain in a person for some time after the infection. One could also detect active infection by looking at rapid antigen tests outcomes. These rapid antigen tests detect viral proteins and can return positive results when the person is most infectious, and also the antibody tests. Usually seroprevalence involves only antibody tests, but active infection can be detected using these two. Antibody tests detect the immune response of the body to the virus. And these are not effective at the time of active infection. They take some time to develop, 2 to 3 weeks. But then once they develop, certain antibodies, for example, the IgG, stay on for some amount of time. The IgM has a faster decay. So one has to do multiple tests of this sort to detect active infection as well as past infection. So to estimate total burden, one must recruit participants and administer tests to them. And then the natural question that arises is the following: what tests should we administer to them? Should it be only the RT-PCR test, or should it be only the antigen test? Or should it be only the antibody test, or a combination thereof? For example, here I've indicated an RT-PCR and an IgG antibody. Also, another question that needs to be addressed is depending on the margin of error that we can tolerate, how many participants should we recruit? So these are two questions that arise. What tests to administer, and also how many participants to recruit. So in the Karnataka Sero survey, there was a design that was already proposed. This is the 2nd to 16th Sero survey. So when we entered the picture, there was already a design. And the design had identified participants would be with low exposure. These would be pregnant women, for example, or people that come to the hospital, but not the patients themselves, the patients' attendees, or people with moderate exposure, those who are mobile in the population, people at bus stops, auto rickshaw drivers, maybe bus conductors, and so on. Also vegetable vendors and other such shopkeepers. And then they also looked at sampling vulnerable people. These would be people over 60 years of age or those with comorbidities. So the plan, when we entered the picture, was already set in terms of the population to be sampled. Also, beginning with an initial proposal to just do IgG tests, antibody tests, due to some suggestions, the active infection testing was also done. So the RT-PCR was also included. And this, I indicated, is a good idea when there is active infection because the IgG takes about 2 to 3 weeks to develop. So one needs to look at active infection. So this was a good idea. But then, for some reason, the antigen tests were also added. And once they added the antigen test, the team said that, oh, for those who have low exposure, the antigen test is something which doesn't have sufficient sensitivity. Why waste the antigen tests on these individuals with low exposure? And therefore, it was removed for those with low exposure. Then there was another complication which came from the desire to follow the ICMR protocol because the RT-PCR tests were conducted and the state's testing machinery was being utilized to get these results. The ICMR protocol said that if you're doing antigen test and if the antigen test comes out to be positive, then one mustn't do the RT-PCR test at that time. But then the IgG test could be carried out. So, and the COVID-19 positive protocol comes into play. So you see, the protocol was actually quite complicated. And we were invited to look at this and to facilitate the statistical analysis at this point in time. What ought to have been the considerations? Well, one must take into account the test costs. So this was taken into account. That's why the antigen tests were removed for those with low risk. The antigen test costs about 450 rupees. It cost around 450 rupees at that time. The RT-PCR test costed around 1,600 rupees at that time. It was quite expensive at that time. The antibody test cost about 300 rupees at that time. So this should have been taken into account as it was done at that time. But we have to do it in a more systematic way. And that's what I would like to explain. Also, the test reliabilities should also be taken into account. For example, the antigen test would call those who had positive correctly as positive with about 50% probability. And those who were negative, it would call them correctly as negative with about 97.5% probability. Okay, so the sensitivity of the antigen test was 50% and the specificity was 97.5%. For the RT-PCR, similar sensitivities and specificities were provided, but of course the sensitivity is much better for the RT-PCR test. This also takes into account the possibility of poor collection. In the case of the Sero survey, these were trained people, and therefore the sensitivity is much higher than what we normally assume for RT-PCR. And then the antibody tests also had sensitivities and specificities. So those need to be taken into account, and those are the considerations. These were taken into account to some extent, but in an ad hoc way. So to pin the problem, so one would like to define the problem of optimal design. To pin the problem, let me come up with some definitions. So I'm going to speak about tests. We have already seen tests. Suppose there are three tests: the antigen test, the RT-PCR test, and the antibody test. And test suites Test suites are a collection of tests that you, the set of possibilities of tests that you conduct on a participant. So a test suite T is a subset of tests done on a particular participant. Capital T, uppercase T, is the set of all possible suite of tests. So if there are 3 tests, for example, there are a total of 8 possibilities, including the null test suite. And if you remove the null test suite, there are 7 possible test suite elements. So here is a more detailed description of test suites and test outcomes. I'll describe test suites first. So here is an individual for whom, for example, we could conduct all 3 tests. So in which case the test suite is denoted 1, 1, 1. That means all 3 tests were done. The antigen test is done, RT-PCR test is done, and the IgG test is done. Or it could be that we skipped the antigen test and did only the other 2. Or it could be one of these other possibilities which are shown here. We did the antigen test, but not the RT-PCR test. But of course, we conducted the IgG test. So this is one possibility. And there is this last possibility with antigen and RT-PCR here. There are several other possibilities which I have not listed here, a total of 7 possibilities. And if you include the null, 8. The null we can throw away. What about outcomes? The outcome for each test, there could be inconclusive, but let us ignore the inconclusive outcomes. We'll assume only positive or negative outcomes. So those are denoted as a 0 or a 1. But if a test was not done, we just write down NA here. So if the test is not done, then the outcome is coded as NA. All the others could, if a test is done, it could be 0 or 1. That leads to a total of 27 possibilities. So you can see that there are quite a few test suites possible and quite a few test outcomes also possible, with the constraint that if a test is not done, the outcome is written as NA. What is a survey design? What's the cost and what is performance? A survey design is a bunch of numbers W, WT, indexed by test suites, which specifies the number of participants that are administered test suite T. So WT is the number of participants that are administered test suite T. And for every T, we have this particular number. The cost of a design is, of course, how much is the total cost for conducting an experiment or conducting the survey with this particular design. So recall that there are WT individuals or participants who are administered test suite T. If the cost is CT for that, the total cost for test suite T is CTWT, and then you sum it up across all possible test suites. And the test cost itself is actually the sum of the component test costs. So that's it. So this is the cost of a design. A survey design is the number of participants undergoing a particular test, and this collection of numbers that specify how many for each test suite. What about performance? So to answer the performance question, let's actually look at a statistical question. One could ask, what is the estimate of total burden for the example that I showed in that slide? I've reproduced that here. So if these were the tests that were conducted and these are the outcomes, what is the estimate of the total burden for this particular design and this particular outcome? I want to highlight a few issues. The first of these is the variation in test suites across participants. For example, you see here on this participant, we conducted all 3 tests. But on a second participant, perhaps a low-risk participant, we did not conduct the antigen test, but we conducted only these 2 and then got an outcome of this sort. And similarly, there could be variability across others. So this is an issue to resolve. How to handle this is something that we need to address. Also, the test outcomes could be noisy. So a 1 here, that is we conducted a PCR test, we got an outcome of a positive result, but that sensitivity is about 97.5%. So this particular 1 could have actually come from a 0. So it could be a false alarm. How do you take that into account? Also, if one looks at counts alone, for example, let's look at the IgG outcome. Here are 5 people that were administered the IgG. Well, one of these was not administered the IgG. 4 people were administered the IgG and 1 was positive. So we could use this alone and say that 25% is the past infection. Or we could use RT-PCR test alone, 2 out of 3 that were conducted. And we could say that it's 2 by 3, but that would be patently false because we also conducted the antigen test. And if you take the antigen test and the RT-PCR test into account, you see that 3 out of 5 or 60% had positive outcomes either on the antigen test or the RT-PCR. And so that would be a 60% answer. But these are all just based on counts of only the antigen test or the RT-PCR or the IgG alone. And if you sum them up, there is something that is actually not, some evidence that is available which is not being taken into account. Because let's focus on this individual one who had a positive RT-PCR outcome and a negative IgG outcome. These tests by themselves have some sensitivities and specificities. But when you take the 2 of them into account, the positive RT-PCR outcome actually enhances evidence for the negative IgG outcome and vice versa. So how do you accommodate or how do you exploit this correlation? So I think that's the question that we would like to address. So there is quite a bit of variability across test suites. The test outcomes are noisy and the counts by themselves do not use all the information available. There is some correlation. We would like to utilize that. Now, we grappled with this problem for a couple of days, Professor Shiva Athreya and I. And after some confusion, some clarity emerged when we put a model on this system and then we analyzed that model. So here is a simple model that enables us to get past all of those issues that I highlighted. So what is the simple model? The simple model divides individuals or categorizes individuals into being in one of 4 states. So the 4 states are 1, 2, 3, 4. When a person is in state 1, the person has active infection, but has not yet started, does not yet have detectable antibodies. So this is the active infection state. Another state is a person who might have had past infection but doesn't have active infection, in which case only the antibodies may be present. There is no active infection. A third state is when one is in an intermediate position. The antibodies have started developing and they are also detectable, but one also has this viral RNA that can be detected. So that's the third state when both are present. And then there is a final state when there is neither active infection nor antibodies that are detectable. So we divided individuals into these 4 states. And the fraction of the population in these 4 states, we call them as P1, P2, P3, and P4. The 4 states I have just described here. And then there are some ideal outcomes when you conduct the antigen test or when you conduct the RT-PCR test or when you conduct the antibody test. There are some ideal outcomes for this. So let's go through this example. For the active infection state, but no IgG, the antigen test and the RT-PCR test are likely to be positive. That's the ideal outcome. And the antibody test would come out to be negative. And similarly, you can write down for the others. In state 2, antibodies only the antibody test would be ideally positive. The other 2 would come out ideally negative. And in this joint state, you would have all 3 being active. And in this state, all of the 3 tests would come out to be negative. There is a question. I will take that question if it is all right during the question session. Or if you could unmute yourself and ask that question, I will answer. Our goal is to estimate the total burden, and the total burden then is people that have been infected who have active infection or have had past infection, and that is given by these 3 states. And so our estimate, if we can estimate P1, P2, P3, P4, then we would like to, the quantity that we are interested in is the sum P1 plus P2 plus P3. Okay, so those are ideal outcomes that I had in the last 3 columns, but the test outcomes are noisy. So the ideal outcomes are depicted as from the state to the ideal outcome here, but the test outcomes are noisy. And so one can have this sort of a binary channel representation. There is an ideal channel and then a noisy channel. And that's why I call them as tandem channels. And so a person in this state, state 1 is active infection only, no IgG. There is a certain probability with which the antigen test would come out positive, and a certain probability with which the antigen negative, and a certain probability with which the antigen test would come out positive. And one can compute those based on the sensitivities and the specificities, and the path from there to 0 and the path from there to 1. So that's quite straightforward. And similarly, one can do a similar thing for the RT-PCR test. So with this sort of representation, there is a hidden state and then a test outcome, which is the observable. One has these observables and one would like to estimate the fraction of the population in each of these 4 states. All right, so the probabilities themselves are, if one makes an independence assumption, conditional independence assumption given the state, one can write down the conditional probabilities of the outcomes given the state. And that is given by this. It depends on the sensitivity and the specificity of each of these and the outcomes. So this is just to say that one can write this down fairly straightforwardly. The problem is that the state is hidden, unseen, and our goal is to estimate what fraction is in each state. The total burden is sum of the first, sum of the fractions corresponding to the first 3 states. But let's ask this more basic question. From the observables, can I tell what fraction is the state? And this P1, P2, P3, P4 are unknowns. So for this, we come up with a parametric model and then do maximum likelihood estimation. So I think that's the content of the rest of the talk, and then I will discuss some extension. So what is this parametric model? So let the unknown parameter be P1, P2, P3, the fractions in state 1, 2, 3, active infection only, antibody only, and both. Then the 4 disease state probabilities will then be P1, P2, P3, and P4 is 1 minus the sum of the 3. And we'll assume that the n individuals who are sampled, the n is sufficiently small, and we'll make an independence assumption. So when we sample them, each the probability that that individual will be in state 1 or state 2 or state 3 or state 4 is given by P1 or P2 or P4. And this is independent across the individuals, across the samplings. And this is all right. It's actually a sampling without replacement. But if n is small, this is a reasonable assumption to make. And for each individual, we know the test outcomes, and from that we know the tests administered for this particular individual. I'll denote that as the test suite is T of n for this individual, and the test outcome, the observable. Both of these are observed, test suite as well as the test outcome. And we'll have this information with which we can then have to go and infer what the P1, P2, P3 are. So what is the likelihood that we observe this particular observation, that is test outcomes, on this individual, given that the individual may have been in a certain state, and given that we conduct this particular test suite? And of course, the state is hidden. So we write down the total probability for the state and the observable, and then we marginalize the state, and that gives us the conditional probability of the outcome, given the test suite, which we know for each individual. And here, this is based on the transition probabilities that I highlighted in the previous slide. I'll just put that down here. So that gives us the parametric model. The model is linear in the unknowns P1, P2, P3, and P4. And we would like to estimate that based on the observations. So what we employ is a simple maximum likelihood estimation here. We write down the likelihood assuming independence across the n individuals. Here is the probability that we observe this particular outcomes when we conducted the tests corresponding to T of n on the nth individual. And there are a total of n individuals, and I assume that I have sampled independently from the population, assuming that sampling without replacement is something that's close to sampling with replacement. And once you do that, you can write down this likelihood and try to find that P which best explains the observation. So that's this maximization. And this maximization can be carried out numerically, because if you take the logarithm of this, it turns out to be a concave function. And this concave function, it's actually strictly concave except in some degenerate cases. So it has a unique maximum in most cases. And this concave function can be optimized, can be maximized quite easily using a numerical procedure. Yeah. So this answers the estimation problem, but what about performance? So we get an estimate, but how good is this estimate? And is our design an appropriate, the best possible design? So to answer that question, I must say how good the estimate is. And we once again go back to classical statistics and use asymptotics, the large sample asymptotics. So for example, under some regularity conditions on the score function, the maximum likelihood estimate is consistent in the sense that it approaches the true P as n becomes large. And we are assuming that n is still small compared to the large population size. And under additional conditions, so this is reassuring to know. Under additional conditions, we also know that there is asymptotic normality. So if you take the error, subtract, so there is this convergence, you look at the error, you upscale the error, we know that it converges to the normal distribution. A normal distribution's covariance is the n-sample Fisher information matrix. I of PW is a per sample Fisher information matrix because I have done a rescaling here. So that per sample Fisher information matrix where you normalize the n-sample Fisher information and you take that inverse. That tells us the covariance matrix. And that suggests that if you look at the estimate itself for finite n, there is some hand waving here, and that hand waving suggests that this p hat of n is normal with mean p because we have consistency, and then there is a covariance around this, and the covariance is we bring back the n-sample Fisher information matrix inverse. So this suggests that the estimates have some variance. And we are not actually interested in P1, P2, or P3 individually. We are interested in P1 plus P2 plus P3. And if you look at that linear combination, you can write down what its variance is. So we are interested in P1 plus P2 plus P3. That's a linear combination of the parameters. And that gives us this particular quadratic form as the variance. And so there is a confidence interval. What we would like to do is sharpen this confidence interval as much as possible. And so the size of this interval is then a measure of how well we are doing. So here is some additional information about the Fisher information matrix. I put this here. This is the n-sample Fisher information matrix. I put this here only to say how the design enters into the picture. It's actually a per sample Fisher information matrix associated with the test suite T multiplied by the number of tests that we conduct for that particular suite, number of participants we select for that particular suite. So this is how the design enters into the picture. But given a particular design, you can say how good that particular design is by looking at the variance of the estimate. And here are some advantages of using maximum likelihood estimation on this particular model. We were able to address all the questions that I highlighted there. For example, the variability across test suites. By doing this, we take into account these were the tests that were conducted, these were the observations, and the likelihood and the product across those likelihood and its maximization naturally handles this variability. Also partial data. We lost about 10% of the samples in the Cello survey. That means some IgG were not available, some RT-PCR tests were not available. That's partial data. How do we handle that? So this likelihood writing and then optimization enabled us to handle that as well. It exploits all the data available, the correlation between the RT-PCR test and the antibody test, them enhancing each other's value in some sense. That's also handled. Also, we are able to handle noisy observations, the sensitivity taken into account. So if one looks only at the IgG test and executes this procedure, one can actually get a closed form expression for the estimate, and that's what is called the Rogin-Gladden formula. That's explicit, and you can get a closed form estimate. But given our multiple tests, etc., one needs a numerical procedure to estimate the total burden. So this was done for Karnataka during the September survey. It was conducted across all the 30 districts, overall 290 sentinel sites. And what we did was leverage the state's AIDS prevention and TB surveillance teams to conduct these tests. And this is the sort of outcome. So here is Bangalore West, which had about 45.6 total burden around the September timeframe. But there were some districts which had very little infection, and some zones in Bangalore itself which had, we did this for each of the zones. So each zone was a unit, and we conducted this test, came up with an estimate and the interval. And this is the kind of variability that we saw across that district. So this was for the first set of survey. But was this the best design? And in the next few minutes, I will highlight how we could have improved upon this. I now want to come up with a mathematical formulation of an optimization problem, and then we should have solved that particular optimization problem. So given a design, given the maximum likelihood estimation procedure, we get a certain estimate and a confidence interval. The size of this confidence interval is a measure of performance. The lower this is, the smaller this is, the better. And therefore, what we could have as an objective is to minimize this confidence interval size. One could also think about this from an information theory perspective, where one looks at the maximizing the mutual information. They are equivalent in this particular context. So what one is doing is maximizing mutual information between the observation and the hidden state, or alternatively, one can think of it as just minimizing variance. So here is a design problem. We are given us, I told you about cost constraints, and I also told you about the second consideration, which is sensitivities and specificities. So let's say that we are given a certain budget, the costs of the tests for each of the test suites. What's the best survey design? This is the number of participants that we choose for administering a certain test in order to minimize the total variance of the disease burden estimation. So one can pose this problem, and now mathematically it is this quadratic minimization problem. So here is the Fisher information matrix. We are looking at this quadratic. We minimize this across all possible designs. Of course, the designs are constrained to be integral, but one can relax that constraint, take the W's to be real valued, and then one can try to optimize this problem, subject to the constraint that the WTs are positive. The number of participants that we recruit cannot be negative. And of course, there is a cost constraint. The cost must be within what the budget allows. So one can solve this particular problem. I'll give you one example just to say why it is important to solve this particular problem and do the right design. Consider these two test suites. In the first test suite, we conduct only the antigen test and the IgG test. The antigen test cost about 400 rupees and the antibody 450 rupees, and the antibody test cost about 300 rupees. So that's 450 plus 300. That cost is about, this test suite costs about 750 rupees. On the other hand, around February timeframe, the RT-PCR test cost about 1,200 rupees, and the antibody test was still around 300 rupees. So if one were to use this test suite, for example, then the cost would be 1,500 rupees for one participant. So for this cost, you can actually recruit two participants and conduct this test suite. For the cost of one T prime, which is the second one with RT-PCR and antibody, I could have administered test suite T with just the RAT and the antibody test on two individuals. Which is better? So that's actually the question that we are trying to solve. And there is an instructive single test case, but I will, in the interest of time, I will go directly to look at what the outcome looks like. So as a function of cost, we can, so here is the cost on this axis, and here is the variance on this axis. And it goes down as 1 divided by C. So this sort of tells us how much accuracy our budget can buy, but it also tells how much accuracy our design can buy. So if you increase the C for a given design, you have a certain improvement or a reduction in the variance. But by optimizing the design, we can also we can also lower this variance to some extent. And that optimization depends on minimizing this quadratic A of VP. So here is a theorem. This theorem says that consider this particular optimization problem, where here is the quadratic function and the n-sample Fisher information matrix is here, but we modify it to take the cost into account, and then ask for the VTs, the parameters that come here, to be less than or equal to 1. One can interpret the VT as actually the fraction of the budget that is being used for test suite T. And so this is less than or equal to 1 because the total budget is consumed when this is actually equal to 1. And all the VTs, this is a fraction of the budget, so this is positive. So solve this particular optimization problem, and then the number of participants, let V star be the optimum, the number of participants that you should recruit, WT star, is actually just VT star times C, where VT star comes from this optimum. So VT star times C says that this is the fraction of the budget that you should allocate for test suite T. And if test suite T costs CT, then that's the number of tests that you should run. So one solves this quadratic optimization problem and then utilizes that to come up with the right design. And then the minimum variance that one gets is this A of V star at this particular point, which is the true state of nature, over the cost. So this is the design that one has. I will skip these examples. There are some extensions which relate to unknown P. For example, when we are trying to estimate P, and the variance depends on the particular parameter or the P itself. But if we have only some range for this particular P, then what one would like to do is minimize the max variance. And so one can formulate a game problem here. It then becomes a min-max problem. And there is a certain worst case optimal design that one can come up with. So this is what we used in the second Sero survey. And there is another thing that one could use, and this is something that we should be thinking about going forward. That is, the sensitivity of the rat is better on the rapid antigen test is better on those who show symptoms than on those who are asymptomatic. And whether somebody shows symptoms or not is something which is observable. And based on this observable, one can actually decide on the test suite, and this could improve the accuracy or reduce the accuracy further. So one can solve this problem also. I will not go into the details, but we just break this problem into two smaller problems, a population with symptom, where you solve a problem on symptomatics, and then you solve the design problem on asymptomatics, and then you put the two together. So there is an outcome here that I would skip as well. So to quickly summarize, and then I want to show one design, a website where where this design can be seen. So we have proposed a parametric model to enable disease burden estimation. We proposed an optimal design criterion for total burden estimation, which is the minimization of variance. The design criterion is what is called C-optimal design in the design literature. And the solution told us exactly what accuracy our budget can buy. And one of the things, the outcomes that comes is that the test proportions don't change with the budget. That's what we exploited. That was the VT, the optimum VT, what fraction of the budget is used for a certain test suite. So there are variations of these. This is a classical problem. Chernoff had already sort of outlined this in 1953. He looked at a certain different design criterion, but for our disease burden estimation, we'll have to look at the sum, and this C-optimal design is there. So There were quite a few collaborators on this, and I would like to thank all of them. And also, many of us were supported by funds, and I would like to acknowledge the funding agencies as well. What I would like to end with is this website where we have an optimal design calculator. One can, for example, go and enter what the cost of the antigen test is, etc., and then run the code for a certain. This says that the number of participants that we must recruit for each of those test suites is 0 for most, but except for one test suite. And this is exactly what we use in the second set. Thank you. I will stop.
The first one is by Pautha Majumdar. Are you looking for a minimum variance unbiased estimator?
Okay. So what I'm not looking for an unbiased estimator here. Ideally, we would like to get an unbiased estimator as well. I'm just going for a maximum likelihood estimator. I'm proposing the use of the maximum likelihood estimator. That is not necessarily unbiased, but asymptotically it is consistent.
Okay. Would the errors in the various tests not play into the variance?
Yes, they would, and that has been taken into account when we take the variance estimate that we are trying to minimize. So that has been accounted for when we estimate the variance. You mean, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Would the errors in the various tests not play into the variance estimation?
Yes, they would, and that has what has been taken into account when we try to minimize this variance.
Earlier, he had asked another question. Are we trying to estimate prevalence at a point of time or incidence during a period of time?
Okay.
The design will depend on what we are trying to estimate, isn't it?
Absolutely. So what we were trying to estimate at that time is the survey got conducted and finished on the 18th of September. And we wanted to estimate how many people were infected either through were actively having infection or had past infection. So that was the total disease burden that we wanted to estimate. Yeah, and, so we wanted to estimate at that point of time how many, and that's why we had to conduct multiple tests.
Okay. We'll have one last question from Somadatta Sinha. Since the RT-PCR and RAT testing are highly skewed towards symptomatics, but the disease spread is also dependent on the asymptomatics in the population, is there any way to include that in the design?
In some sense, when we went and sampled the population, we were actually looking at people that we normally wouldn't have suspected to have COVID. So we actually went to the marketplaces and sampled people, went to the bus stops and sampled people. So they haven't come to the hospital for care. So in some sense, we are actually, they may be showing symptoms, but they are the mild symptomatics, so to speak. So that is what enabled us to get an unbiased estimate. And I think that perhaps answers Somadatta Sinha's question. Yeah. We are looking for the general population prevalence. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for your responses to all the questions.